Hi there, my name is Wally, and today I'm going to be talking about how I lived in New York City on $50,000 a year. So I had always wanted to move to New York City. It was always a dream of mine, as I'm sure it is yours while you're watching this video. And I think that every time I would look and view videos and do research and read articles about people living in New York City, about their budgeting, and about how they made their lifestyle work, I was always a little baffled because a lot of the times people danced around, their salary or how they made their money. And I would always see, 22-year-olds living in Manhattan on, I would assume, a trust fund or something as an influencer. I don't know. Or maybe they made money on the internet. Essentially, I wanted to find a video and produce and create this informative video because I think that a lot of us more normal people need something to kind of look at in terms of planning, because I definitely went down to New York City with about $1,000. I did have a job lined up, of course, but I didn't have any other like funds to draw off of or fall back on if my job didn't work out. And I'm sure a lot of you are in the same boat. So I just wanted to create this kind of sit down video because a lot of the times they were perfectly edited or like a company produced them or whatever. So you get the point. And I'm just going to dive right into my finances. And I'm not shy. So you guys will be able to see everything that I spent, I made, how New York City works, just so you can give yourself a benchmark. I do want to obviously say in this video, $50,000 there's a lot of people living in New York City on a lot less than $50,000, but there's a lot of people living in New York City on a lot more than $50,000. Because a lot of the times people, when they have the New York City dream in their head, it could be based off of movies or TV or whatever they see online. And a lot of that is going to be more than $50,000 a year to make that come true. So this, whether you're making $50,000 a year or not, this may just provide a good benchmark for you. So you have an idea as to what to expect when you come to New York, what your lifestyle may be, where you want to live, kind of all that jazz. So let's get right into it. So I moved down to New York. Like I said, I already had a position at I work in education. So I had about 3 years of professional experience behind me, and I have a college degree. So those two things were definitely in my favor in terms of securing a position. And I can talk more and make another video about maybe like how you get a job in New York, how you get interviews, the moving process, all that kind of stuff. But I'm trying to keep it more just to what my day-to-day spending was and, the bottom line essentially. So I just made some notes and I just want to make sure I'm covering everything. So I want to start off with my salary. So like I said, I worked in education. I made about $50,000 right on the dot there. In New York City, obviously you make $50,000 a year, but that's heavily taxed. So New York City is probably one of the highest taxes in the country. I'm not sure where you're coming from. I was coming from Boston, which is another big city in the Northeast, and their taxes are quite high as well. But in Boston, I only paid state and federal taxes, whereas in New York, you'll pay state, federal, and city tax. So that's something I wasn't really accustomed to. I'm not sure if a lot of cities do that nationwide, but so you pay a pretty hefty, state tax. Obviously, federal is pretty standardized, but then I was paying a city tax. So I lived in the borough of Queens. It does vary by borough how much your tax will be. Mine was $80 per paycheck, or $160 per month. And as you'll see, someone living in New York City on $50,000 a year, depending on your lifestyle, $160 can be quite a bit of money coming out of your check that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. And nobody had told me that prior to moving there. So that's something I really wanted to tell you guys about because I think that's something to take into consideration. It's interesting because when I was living in Boston, I was making a little less than $50,000 a year, but I actually ended up bringing home more than what I did in New York because of the taxes are so high. Obviously, New York offers an amazing abundance of opportunity and cool things to do, but that comes with a price, and one of those being their city tax. So I think that Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx are probably all on the same page in terms of what their borough tax is, but I know Manhattan is the most expensive, so it's something you are taking into consideration. Think about where you want to live because, we'll get into further details about, obviously, costs of living vary depending on where you are in the city, but especially the city tax too. So that's kind of, with that being said, so I brought home per month $2,900. So that was my net take home after taxes, essentially. My biggest expense, of course, being rent. So I had shared an apartment in Ridgewood, Queens. Ridgewood, Queens is really close to like Bushwick and Brooklyn. It's a very kind of young area, pretty affordable, I would say. I was when I was looking at apartments, I moved in with two people I knew, but we wanted something that was, we couldn't really necessarily afford Manhattan, but we didn't want to move something super far out. And with that being said, we all paid about $900 a month. So my piece was $900 living with the two other people. So, of course, in New York City, there are other places you can live. I would say $900 is pretty conservative, I guess. Like, I know some people who might have paid less, but they probably had a lot longer commute on the train. I was about 30 minutes into the city. If, just based on my experiences, you were looking in Manhattan on $50,000 a year, you're really not going to be able to live alone, really anywhere in the city. In Manhattan, rents usually ranged, of course, if you're sharing a space with people, it's going to be between like $1,300 and $1,500. So that kind of brings me to my next point, is that, so I had $900 for my rent, but I also paid $400 in student loans. So that's another thing this is why I'm making this video, is because every time I would watch videos, people never really mentioned student loans, I guess. Maybe they didn't have them. I do, as a lot of people also do my age who may be moving to New York City, who may be watching this video. So I paid $900 a month in student loans. If you are a lucky one who do not have student loans, that could potentially go towards, obviously, your rent. And then at that point, you could move into the city, right? Because my budget, as you'll see, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, but every month I essentially zeroed out. So it's not like I was saving a ton of money in New York City on $50,000 a year with my current rents, with my current schedule of like costs and everything. So that's something to take into consideration. If you have no student loans, you could put that money towards your rent and then move closer to the city, the city, Manhattan, or you could live in Manhattan. But I had student loans, $400 a month. So $900 for rent, $400 for student loans. Food, I paid about $200. And by food, I mean groceries. I didn't eat out a ton, but that does not count eating out. That's just groceries. So I brought my lunch pretty much every day to work. And I cook my dinner and my breakfast and everything. So I don't eat meat. I'm a pescatarian, and I don't really eat fish that much either. So what I was buying at the grocery store was typically vegetables, fruits, carbs. I will say one thing about New York City, where I lived, again in Queens, it's going to be less expensive just naturally than Manhattan, or even Brooklyn, some parts. I just went to a local grocery store. New York has an abundance of food. So there's a lot of places you can get food. Other than grocery stores, you can either go to like obviously more high-end grocery stores like Whole Foods if you're in Manhattan or have access to those after work or something, or you can shop more locally. My grocery store is really nice. That's something that was really important to me when I was moving, that I wanted something like a nice grocery store nearby that wasn't too expensive, that was like clean and nice, and mine was, and you'll find plenty of those. You'll also find other options to buy food, such as, there's produce carts and there's other markets and shops. You can look around, but there's quite an abundance. Where when I was in Boston, you didn't have that as much. Obviously, cities are very different nationwide, but we just had like chain grocery stores, like Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. Like there wasn't a lot of options, but in New York, there's tons. So my food bill, I would say in New York, was maybe a little less than when I was living in Boston. And that was $200. My cable, my bills, everything obviously was split with two other people because I had two other roommates. So my portion was about $100 a month. That's never been something I really, consider or look at really in depth. Like obviously you need to have, Wi-Fi, and you need to have electricity and water. So you're not really gonna be shopping around for those things. So that's something I don't have much else to say on that. So that was $100 a month. My MTA pass was $130, of course. Living in Queens, I was taking the train. Most of the jobs and opportunities you're gonna find are in Manhattan. Even if you live in Manhattan and work in Manhattan, if you can make it work on $50,000 a year, you're still most likely going to be on a train. Other reasons, like you probably will need an MTA pass. That was $130. That's always fluctuating. I think it goes up every little so often. So I paid $130 for that. So my sanctified mother actually paid my cell phone bill while I was in New York. I was on a family plan. Long story, I'm not going to get into it, but it's she covered that. So that's something you have to consider as well. That's like usually $100 probably, right, for a cell phone. So that's one thing I did leave out in this, but I did want to put it into kind of a list of items that you would have as expenses for someone living with $50,000 a year, so that you have an idea as to how much you would then be spending. So however much your cell phone bill is, I just factored it in here as well, because that's pretty much, a lot of people already have that cost, but some people also, their parents may be paying it. I don't know, again, who's watching this video. I'm assuming a lot of transplants who are about my age, and maybe you're lucky enough if you're young and your parents maybe still want to help you out. So, and then the savings, I would try to save about $100 a month just for like a rainy day fund. I was there during COVID and stuff like that, so it's obviously a lot of people like lost their jobs, and there was a lot of things around that. So you just want to have money saved. You really don't want to live paycheck, especially in New York City, because you just really never know what's going to happen. Like, again, if you're coming in as a transplant, like you always need money to go home or, you know, help somebody out, or if you have an emergency, or there are just so many things, especially if you're going to be far from home, you're not going to have people you can depend on, like family, friends, like you need money. So I saved about $100 a month. So that brought me down to leaving. I just did all the math, but essentially I had $970 a month to spend on things like entertainment, fun, anything else really, lunches, dinners, which seems like a lot, but it doesn't go super far in New York. So I'll kind of talk about a few of the things I did spend my money on. I have just a short list over here, kind of outside. But one thing I did enjoy was the gym. So when I always had my gym pass. When I was in Boston, I would go to boutique fitness classes. Boston and New York have a lot of the same chains as they do nationwide, of course. But some of the boutique fitness classes I had, and this can apply to most things, is that it's going to be more expensive in New York City, just because by nature. And it's not just by like a little bit, it's by a substantial amount that you will notice. So I'll just use one example. I would go to a fitness class in Boston. It was about $30 per class, but in New York City, it's like $36 to $38. And like I said prior, like I was making technically less in New York, even though I was making more because of the taxes. So again, this is just showing you, kind of giving you an idea that $50,000 is not going to go super far in New York. I don't want to sound a certain way by saying that, because obviously there's so many people living on less than that in New York City. But just for somebody who's wanting to like make the New York dream come true, and like for somebody who did get not sold, like I did have an idea of what I was getting into, but it's, you know, your life's gonna be very different than maybe your friends, and especially a lot of New Yorkers, because people there, the New York you see, again, just to, you know, talk in circles, I guess, but the New York you see on TV shows, Instagram, things like that is like not the New York that you'll be living on $50,000 a year. I was under no impression that is the New York I was going to be living in, but that's just something in case you want to know more insight on that. And so I would do that. I would also you can find deals in New York, of course. I spent a lot of money on, I would say, experiences to an extent, I could call it. So I do have friends in the city. New York's a great place for young people. Transplants are from everywhere. You're not going to have a problem meeting people, but usually to have those social experiences, since New York is so big, and I can do another video on this, a lot of times your friends are not going to live super close to you. I mean, sometimes they will, and that'll be a blessing, of course, but coming from Boston, it's pretty small, where people live like 10 minutes away. In New York, you're not going to have that. People live in various boroughs. Some people may live in Jersey, and you'll probably be all trying to meet at a centralized location, which usually is like a bar, restaurant, or some kind of entertainment, and that's going to cost money, of course. It's not just like, oh, come to my apartment and, you know, have some wine or hang out or something, which that can also happen, but just letting you know that since everyone's coming from all these different locations, you're primarily going to be meeting up in a space that's going to cost money. And I do have a credit card statement on my computer from when I was in New York, and so I'm just going to read through some of those things in a moment, just so you have an idea as to what my money was going towards and kind of what prices may be in New York. Again, just for a benchmark. Sorry, I'm just looking down because I have a few other things here. So another thing I like doing as well is I really like traveling. So I was still traveling in New York. New York's a great place to leave when you can, especially too because there's 3 airports, tons of, you know, nonstop destinations, and I just really love traveling. I didn't want to be one of those people, and I really like New York, but I don't want to be one of those people who just like were cash strapped. So again, I think if I lived in Manhattan or had certain experiences, I probably would be pretty cash strapped and I couldn't travel. But with that $970 I had a month to spend, I would allocate some of that towards travel if I so chose that month. Final thing I want to bring up before I talk about my credit card statement and just go through over a few things that I spent my money on in just one example of a month is that visitors. So you probably will have visitors living in New York, which is amazing. They want to come see your city. They want to have a vacation, but for them, that's what it is. It's a vacation. But you're going to also be expected, and you will want to hang out with them and do the fun touristy things and show them your city and go out to dinner and go to a Broadway show maybe, or go shopping or do any of that stuff. And you have to save up and think about that, because I had a lot of people come visit me, which I felt very blessed for. I love that. But it, you know, I had to think about that, because that's going to be, you know, additional costs that you're going to be shelling out. And on top of that, like, because obviously it's their vacation, but for you, it's your everyday life. So, and if you have like maybe a visitor a month or something like that, or every few months, that's going to add up and you're going to have to think about that. But with all that being said, I'm going to just talk about my credit card statement. I just want to go over a few things so you have an idea. Again, I'm not shy, like I said, and that's why I really wanted this video to be like not professionally produced or by some 22-year-old influencer or somebody with tons of credit card debt. Like, I want to be very transparent. I didn't have any credit card debt. Like I said, I moved down to New York with about $1,000. That was like helping with my move-in costs and maybe buying some furnishings for my apartment. And then I had like saved a bit. I left New York in a pretty good financial situation, and I think I had a really good time there. So let me just see my credit card, and I just want to go over just a few things to like give you an example. Let's see. So one of the months I was there, I had spent about $1,276, it says. But that being said, 200 of that was allocated towards food. So everything else didn't go on my credit card, but food would, of course. And so if you think about that, I spent about $1,000 that month. And when my $970 budget, that kind of falls right aligned with that. So I just picked this at random. I didn't pick this as like an prime example, but this is pretty much what I was spending every month. Like, there should be no surprises here. I didn't look at this prior, so I'm not gonna go into it great detail, but as I just see straight from here is, I went to a few restaurants. Again, restaurants in New York are gonna be a lot more expensive. I went to a few happy hours here and there. Had to get a few Ubers. Ubers are gonna be pretty expensive in New York. It depends on where you live exactly, but I know going in and out of Queens, I would spend, for example, here, let's see, I probably split this one, but there was a few charges here on one of the weekends for about, $20, $14. That's just, one way for us to go in to the city. Again, a few other restaurants here, some of my local spots in Queens and in Brooklyn. But again, if you're living in Manhattan, if you want to make that Manhattan dream be a reality, I think you can on $50,000 a year, but you're not going to really be having a lot of money for these other things. Because, for example, I worked in Manhattan, so when I was there, I would buy, if I had to go to CVS on my lunch break to get a shampoo or toothpaste, it's going to be quite literally like $1 more just because you're in Manhattan. Whereas when I would go home to the CVS in Queens, it would be less expensive. So if you're constantly in Manhattan working, living, all that stuff, my lifestyle of going out to eat and kind of enjoying myself and going to my boutique fitness classes isn't going to be reality for you because you're really not going to be able to do all of it. So I guess that's what it kind of boils down to. Like, you can do certain things, but you can't, eat out when you want and save and travel and go to like the shows and have the visitors. Like, it just, $50,000 a year in New York does not go that far. Again, people living on a lot less, but that's how I felt as a transplant. So I read a few of the other things as well. Again, mostly just food, like $45 at a restaurant I went with a friend, $56 in another restaurant I went with a friend. So that's the thing. I always wanted to make, especially as a transplant, like, you're going to be wanting to see those people, and make those connections. So that's something that was really important to me. So as you can see, the few things that I read, it wasn't much. It was just a few restaurants, maybe an Uber here or there. And I went to Duane Reade maybe like twice, just a convenience store. So the money goes quick, but you'll be fine, obviously. Like, you could make it work. Again, this is just a benchmark. If you're making more than this, or if you're making less, or if you don't have any of these expenses, it could probably just not be as super helpful as I wanted it to be. But I hope it was a little bit of a breakdown. And I can always do other videos about like how I moved down there, like I mentioned previously, why I left New York. I no longer live in New York City. I was there for about a year. I can talk about the different areas, what it's like living as a transplant, just so many different things I can really touch on if you're interested in that. So if you do want to see that, let me know. But until I see you guys next time, bye.